Given that the team is the primary operating unit of value creation in an organization, it's staggering how few companies have a successful and reliable blueprint for how teams should function given today's realities. In this show, we talk to Deborah Ancona, the Seeley Distinguished Professor of Management at the MIT Sloan School of Management, about the need for X teams and how they create the DNA of high-performance and adaptive organizations. Tune in to an important conversation on The Evolving Leader.
Hey folks, welcome to The Evolving Leader, the show born from the belief that we need deeper, more accountable, and more human leadership to confront the world's biggest challenges. I'm Scott Allender.
And I'm John Gomes.
Mr. Gomes, how are you feeling on this Friday afternoon?
I am feeling in need of this conversation. Our guest wrote a book a fair time ago that I absolutely loved, and it's come out of the library several times every year to help us, think about challenges facing our clients. So I'm really excited about this conversation. How are you feeling, Scott?
I'm feeling grateful that it's Friday afternoon and the weekend is here, because I definitely could use a bit of rest and renewal. But what a wonderful way to sort of cap the week with the conversation we're about to have, because as you alluded to, today we're joined by a wonderful guest, Deborah Ancona, a professor at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Sloan School of Management. She is best known for her pioneering research on high-performing teams, distributed nimble leadership, and leadership signatures. She is also the founder of the MIT Leadership Center, which is revolutionizing traditional leadership to solve the toughest problems in the world of management. Her book that you just mentioned a moment ago, John, X Teams, gives deep insights into how to create innovative, successful teams using examples from Microsoft and Takeda and the Museum of Modern Art. She's also founded XLead, which develops research-based tools to encourage creative leadership across management levels. And her work bridges theory and practice, bringing novel ideas into practical leadership application. Deborah's been with MIT for over 20 years, and in 2018 was awarded the Jameson Prize, MIT Sloan's highest teaching honor. And her widely acclaimed research on how family upbringing affects workplace behaviors was published in the Harvard Business Review, titled Family Ghosts in the Executive Suite. And I'm going to want to hear about some of these ghost stories. So Deborah, welcome to The Evolving Leader.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here.
Deborah, welcome to the show. How are you feeling today?
I'm feeling great. It's a beautiful sunny day in New Hampshire. I have a nice walk in the woods planned for later on. Had a great class last night. Going to be working on my book today, a new book that I'm going to be writing. And my kids are all off and running and flourishing on their own. So life is good.
That's great to hear. So Deborah, what was the moment in your career when you decided that leadership and team performance would be the focus of your life? Was there a kind of an aha moment, or was it just a gradual process of realization?
I think for me, those two things are a little bit different. I started my career on teams, and teams have always fascinated me from the time I was young, and teams being families or groups or any kind of small system. And I just was always fascinated. Why do some work and some don't work? The dynamics can get very, very crazy. So what's going on in those entities? And when I went to college, I learned that actually they would pay you to study teams. This was an incredible idea. You could have a career doing this. So I went to grad school and got to dig a little bit deeper, and then just followed the data, and that took me in all kinds of interesting directions. So that's the team side. On the leadership side, I really think that one of the most intriguing questions we have is how do people work? What makes people tick? And how do we then unravel well, who we are, and then work on change. That to me is a kind of quintessential question and task for all of us. So that's why I really love this leadership piece, where we can take knowledge of organizations and knowledge of psychology and really dig into what we call people's leadership signatures, how they came to be, how do we change them. So that's just an intriguing question that I don't think I'll ever get tired of trying to answer.
So just to set the stage, so what is an X team?
So an X team, X is not cross-functional, X is externally active. So it's not only what teams do inside their boundaries, but also how they go out across their boundaries. They're externally active.
So that was the kind of the core idea here, is that why when you were looking at why good teams fail, it was because of this kind of introversion. Can we talk about that a little bit, unpack it?
Yeah, I'm always surprised, maybe because I've been talking about X teams for a long time, and with my colleague Henrik Bresman, we co-wrote the book and continue to work together. It always surprises me when I get in front of a group of executives, and I've done this hundreds of times, and I say, what makes for an effective team? And outpour all these answers: clear goals, clear roles, synergies across team members, trust, good communication, good collaboration, on and on and on. And I always then stop and say, well, you know what? That's half right. But if you're only half right, you can be very, very wrong. The fact is that all of the best-selling textbooks on teams, all of our corporate programming and training is on how do we improve the internal dynamics of teams. But the truth of the matter is, we're living in an exponentially changing world. We're living in a world where it's not just what you do in your team, it's what you do across teams in your organization. And increasingly, the world has moved to dealing with the external ecosystem. It's how do you learn from and collaborate with and partner with not just others in your organization, but other organizations. And so X teams, and we've got a ton of data on this, are not just focused on those internal dynamics that everybody thinks about, but are also focused on how do we go what we call out before in order to figure out what's going on in that external world. Who do we want to partner with? What do we want to learn from others? How do we gain legitimacy in the internal environment? All of those things require an external approach. And so why do good teams fail? Good teams fail because they only focus internally. And when you focus internally, you build up a very strong boundary for the team, and you lose out on that external learning, getting resources and getting buy-in from other parts of the organization. You aren't learning except from dated existing knowledge, and that can bring you very easily into a failure pattern.
So what are the capabilities then of the X team? What are that helps them to externalize? What do they need to do?
Three things that they need to do. One is sense making. So again, if you're working in a world that's changing more and more rapidly, so we're accelerating the pace of change, sense making is figuring out what's going on in that ever-changing world. So it means learning about changing technologies, changing political factors. It's understanding more about your customer. Your customer wanted last week may not be what your customer wants this week. How do you track that? How do you look at that? How do you look at changes in the economy or the political environment today? Every day is a new announcement on the political environment in this country and around the world that's even more intense. So sense making is, how do you keep up with that world? How do you figure out who's best to partner with, who best to get information from? So sense making, making sense of the context in which you're operating is a major function. The other thing is ambassadorship. So ambassadorship is going up the organization. We live in hierarchies. We live in a world where you have to get resources from on high. You have to get buy-in from other parts of the organization. You have to align. a team is more likely to succeed and get those resources if they've got the blessing from senior leaders and if they can align what they're doing with the strategic imperatives of the group ahead of them. Oh, I fit into what you're doing. Oh, good. We'll support you. Sometimes that can't be true, and X teams have to fight for what they want to do. I believe in the revolution when it's necessary. But at any rate, it's ambassadorship is the second piece, getting that buy-in and alignment. And the third is just coordination. There's a huge amount of coordination. Most teams can't operate as solo entities. They have to work with and through a lot of other groups. So managing those interdependencies is a core part. So 3 things: scouting or sense making, ambassadorship, and task coordination.
So interesting to me. So because there's a lot of this that I think you're right. I think there's this myopic focus on the internal, but I hear you saying that you kind of have to look at both, right? But you said go out before you go in. Why is it important that a team looks outside of themselves before they sort of look in on team dynamics?
Well, because if you're building a new product, for example, and you're building it on old data, then you may be making a product that nobody wants anymore. So you have to be up to speed on what is it that our current clients want. And that's part of why you want to go out before in. You want to understand the priorities of the senior leadership so that you know whether or not you're going to fit in and align with where they're going or not, or you want to fight it. So out before in, because you want to understand the context before you set your goals. Your goals have to fit that new environment. And if they don't fit, you can more easily go off course. So it's a course correction where you say, okay, this is the world we're living in. Now I decide what I want to do in that world, as opposed to what I want to do in a world that doesn't exist anymore.
So what have you discovered about distributed leadership and how that can help organizations achieve this, become more agile?
Distributed leadership means different things to different people. What I mean by we mean everything I do, by the way, in case I am not clear about that, is in groups. I love working with other people and have great colleagues. So Elaine Backman and Kate Isaacs on the work on nimble leadership and distributed leadership, by which we mean leadership at all levels, not just leadership at the top, but leadership is distributed. You need people leading at the bottom, the middle, and the top of organizations. And what we have found is that again, we start always with, it's an exponentially changing world. How do we survive in that world? How do we figure out how not to get blindsided by it? And so one of the ways to do that, distributed leadership, is basically you flip the hierarchy on its head. It's not just the top sending orders down. You are empowering people at all levels of the firm to also invent and come up with ideas, new business models, new products, new ways of organizing, and sending those up. So it's both top down and bottom up. And what our work has found is that you want to have 3 different types of leaders in those distributed leadership organizations. So you want on the bottom, which if you flip it is really the top, are your entrepreneurial leaders. So everyone in the company is thinking, how do we do this better? How do we innovate? What's a new way of doing this or a new way of doing that? So you want a set of people working on that. Then you want a set of enabling leaders. So your middle level is not saying do this, do that, etc. They're enabling the entrepreneurial leaders to be better. So many examples, but one example would be a team says, look, we've been missing one particular group out there in the market and we want to create a product for that group, but there's a little bit of resistance. Then the enabling leader might say, okay, we need to make the case to this, and this person. Why don't you put together a presentation? I'll look at it. I'll make sure that you get that meeting and I'll help you to prep so you have the skills to make convincing arguments. So that would be entrepreneurial leaders coming up with new ideas, enabling leaders helping them out. And then it's not that you get rid of the top of the organization. The top of the organization is still extremely important, but they're what we call the architects. They're architecting the system in which X teams thrive, in which all kinds of leaders thrive. So they're figuring out what's the culture. What is a way to have an innovative, agile culture, and what structures and processes enable that. So they're creating, we call it the game board, on which everybody is acting, but you need those other people to be able to act in it. So it's simultaneously building the structure and empowering people to inhabit it.
Since you wrote X Teams, a lot has changed in the world. And one of the things that you notice is just how many teams people are part of. You might be part of 3 or 4 or 5 teams even. And team composition is often never stable. You know, the kind of past version of teams where you're going through the kind of storming, forming, and that sort of, that seems like a bit of the old world. What are you seeing now in terms of the challenges of creating an X team?
Yeah, well, so just for everybody's information, we actually have a second edition of the X Team book, which came out in 2023. So it's all been updated. And if I think of what are the challenges that exist now that didn't exist then, one of them is even post-COVID. Post-COVID, we found that there's much, much more work being done across boundaries and in the broader ecosystem. So even Moderna did an amazing job during the pandemic coming up with this vaccine, but they didn't do it alone. They were talking to experts at different universities. They were talking to people in the government because they had to work on how do we get these drugs delivered and how do we deregulate some things or change the way that the processes we have to go through to move this ahead. They had to talk to people in manufacturing. So they're working across boundaries in ways they never had before. So in some ways, I actually think that the X Team model was ahead of its time. There's even more of a need for it now because of the way in which we're working. Again, we do a lot of work in pharma. Novartis and Takeda, we're partnering. These are rival organizations, and yet they're now cooperating in certain spheres and competing in others. So how do you work across those boundaries? That's a challenge that nobody or many fewer organizations had to deal with early on. So setting that up, teams of teams, crossing those organizational boundaries is a new challenge, and X teams have to evolve to deal with those. The second is a much greater need for sense making. That was always important. It's part of our individual leadership model as well. But if the world is moving more slowly, then you can rely much more on what you already know and what you knew before. And you can't do that anymore. I mean, AI every day is a new application. Every day is new data. Oh, it's great. You improve performance and quality, but at the same time, people lose their creativity. People become too dependent on the technology. I mean, there are all kinds of things coming out every day. So sense making and understanding that new world becomes a much bigger part of what teams need to do now than it was a while ago. And I think in some sense related to that and related to your point, just very well taken, that people are on multiple teams and they're all over the place and team membership is changing, that to deal with those conditions and the speed, you need something that Anita Woolley at Carnegie Mellon, she calls burstiness, we call it pulsing, that you need to figure out ways to pulse work so that you can focus people for a given period of time, and then they can go off on and do their other things. So pulsing might be, okay, this week everybody's going to interview 3 customers, and then we're going to come back and figure out what we're going to do, and then you can go off again. So we go out into the world, we come in and we process and learn from what we did. We go out and learn again, we come back in. So out and in. Or it might be together apart. The other big trend is that not everybody's in the office, right? So we know that if nothing's going on in the office and you come in, you're going to say, oh, why did I come in? I'm not going to come in anymore. But if you have a lot of interesting things going on in the office, then people have fear of missing out and they want to come in more. So you pulse, all right, together. But when we're together, we're doing really important things. We're doing strategic planning. We're doing problem solving. We're doing team building. So all those people all over can come together, build the team, deal with important problems, and then they can go back into their virtual world or into whatever else. So this pattern of together, apart, outside, inside, doing versus learning are all ways to kind of deal with that situation of how do you build a team when it's always changing, when people are coming and going. Well, when you get together, you do an intensive team building, and that holds the team together while it goes out and does the other work it has to do.
Given everything that you've been learning about all of this, how does this influence how the C-suite operates? How do they, the team of teams to kind of X teams?
Well, the senior team has to be a core part of making this all work. So as I said, they have to do their own sense making and their own work to say, how do we build the organization that we need to have, and what strategic directions are going to be most important. And that's going to involve an out before in kind of mindset. One of the best examples of this is Satya Nadella. There was just an article, we teach his case and so on, but a new article just came out about really how he practices what we call an out before in. He doesn't call it that, but he's doing sense making all the time. He sets up, I don't know if it's twice a day or twice a week, he meets with other CEOs around the globe, whether it's customer CEOs, partner CEOs, whether it's CEOs who are working in industries that he wants to learn more about. That is built into his calendar. He spends time with venture capitalists to say, what are you funding? What are the coolest new companies? What are the coolest new technologies? He asks everybody, who do I need to meet? Who's doing interesting, daring things that I need to learn about? That is built into his modus operandi. So senior leadership teams need to do that as well. The first team meeting he ever ran, he sent people on customer visits. He said, go out there. We need to understand those people. He has enabled an environment. In the X-Team book, both the old one and the new one, we have Microsoft examples. And these teams are they feel freed up because of that learning culture, because of that out before in culture that team has created. They feel free to go out and say, okay, customer, what do you do? What gets in the way of what you're doing? So they can start from ground zero on how we can deal with the situation on the ground right now. So that senior team is following the same out before in learning, sense making, but they're also then crafting the culture and structures that enable the whole organization to move forward in learning mode.
I'm fascinated by that because I just wonder how many C-suite teams are actually doing that, because it doesn't sound very much like the agenda of a lot of that I know.
Well, and that's why that first meeting was meant to shake up the team. That's a very visual, okay, get in those vans and go out and see your customers. The other thing that he did was he invited the CEOs of companies that Microsoft had acquired and said, meet with these people because we acquired them because they can do something that we don't know how to do. Why don't you figure out how they did that? Right? It sets up a very different mindset inside the company. And yeah, I would agree that probably not that many C-suites are operating that way.
So in addition to the mindsets that you've mentioned that they need to adopt, what are the sort of maybe legacy mindsets they need to lose?
Well, yes, good question. There are a number of legacy mindset. One is, in some companies, you still can't talk. You can't do a skip level meeting. You can only speak to the next person up there. So that's bad. You have to have open communication going around the organization. Another thing is that you don't pay any attention to input from below, and you have to figure out ways to do that. So a part of legacy systems is people always have ideas. They've always had ideas, but what you need isn't to enable those ideas to move up the hierarchy, and that's much harder. So creating something like a funneling system. So we say to the people, we want you to innovate. You're talking to the customers. You're figuring out the processes. You know what's going on. We want your ideas, but not every idea is a good one. So you have to have some kind of funneling or choice process. Not many organizations have that. So you need to create a mechanism by which that happens. At Takeda R&D, they have the Dragon contest. You come up with new ideas, and there's a team that evaluates those ideas along set criteria. They pick the best ones. The best team gets a dragon. It's a very cool dragon sculpture. But they also get time with the head of R&D so that there's a mechanism to take their idea through the organization. Their legacy organizations don't necessarily have that ability to move ideas up. Southwest Airlines, at least, they used to have a choice process where there was a committee that took new ideas and evaluated them and decided, okay, these don't go up front, but these will move ahead. So you need those kinds of mechanisms to come through.
No, I love this, and what I'm hearing. Tell me if this is right. In this sort of inversion of the hierarchy, we're sort of moving from a power over to a power under, right? It's an enabling force.
Well, I prefer to think of it as a power from a power over to a power with. So it's not
like
that. It's not that one rules and the other. It's not that we're turning it around and everybody rules at the lower levels. It's that we're figuring out how to bridge the upper and lower levels so that innovation and learning can thrive. And it's not the article we wrote on nimble leadership was called "Walking the Line Between Creativity and Chaos." What you want to do is have this empowered, thoughtful, innovative set of people, but not chaos. That's why you need the structures and processes to control what's going on, as opposed to just anyone can do anything. It's not anyone can do anything,
right?
Because that would be bad. So it's power with, so that you can work together to create.
That's good.
I just changing the topic now for a little bit. I read a couple of years ago a fascinating article you wrote about how our family ghosts influence our leadership. Can we unpack that a bit and understand what that means and how it works?
Let's hear some ghost stories.
Let's hear some ghost stories. Okay, so just let's clarify. I know the ghost stories are the best, I have to say. This is the work I'm doing right now, and it is just so interesting and fun. And, my students who are able to kind of tackle the darker sides of their ghosts, there are positive sides of ghosts too, but just have amazing change in their lives. And that's been incredibly rewarding. So what is a ghost? Ghosts are attitudes and behaviors that you learn as a child in your family system that you carry into the executive suite or work. It doesn't have only executives that we carry into work. So that's what we mean by ghosts. And ghosts can be really, really good. So we've started cataloging ghosts. So we have the people pleaser ghost. That comes from a family system in which you want to be the good child, and that means pleasing the parent and doing what the parent wants and doing what the parent says and not contradicting anything or fighting back. So the people pleaser ghost can get you really far ahead in the organization. You know how to please your boss. You know how to please your peers. You know how to, work in the organization. So that's the good side. So most ghosts have both the positive and a negative side to them. The negative of the people pleaser ghosts is that one, if you're so busy pleasing others, sometimes you don't have time to think about, well, what do I want? What do I think is the best way? What is my strategy for moving forward? You don't develop those critical thinking skills or strategic skills because you're so involved in helping other people, or because it's respect for the elders. That's part of that ghost. And people all have different ghost stories, but that particular ghost is you don't question authority, you follow authority. And so those folks they're great, they work really well, they're good with their teams, but sometimes they're not so good at speaking up to authority, of saying, I disagree, saying, no, that's not what we should be doing here. So speaking up in those executive meetings becomes hard for the people pleaser. Another common ghost that we have is the can-do performer ghost. The can-do performer ghost is wonderful. Okay, you set the bar. I'm gonna make it. I'll make it happen. I'm gonna go. And that often comes from family systems where everything was about get educated and succeed, and you're representing the family, and we want to represent our community, and so your job is to learn. Your job is to be good at education. Your job is to succeed. And so you become a can-do kind of ghost. And again, that is amazing. You know, a lot of my students are executives, and they're successful executives, or they wouldn't be in my classes. And they have risen up the hierarchy really good. But then there can be a dark side to that kind of ghost too. One is perfectionistic. I'm never enough. I've always got to do more. I'm always trying to please more. Sometimes it's about getting love. I think that the road to getting appreciated and loved by my family is by performing. So I'm always trying to get more. Never can stop. Perfectionist tendencies. It's never enough. And some of those folks burn out. You can't keep that pace going. You can't always raise the bar. So there's burnout. There is an inability to delegate, because maybe the others won't do it as well as I can. So I'm going to take over this, and I'm going to take over that. And then you spending too much time at work. Your family suffers because you're in this escalating, faster moving cycle of more.
What's the ghost that does the most damage?
That's an interesting
John wants
question.
to know if it's his.
I think that the biggest so a couple come to mind. One is for people who have learned that they're worthless. For a child, let's say, who, I don't know, a girl born in China when there was the one-child policy, whose father walked into the room, learned it was a girl, was so upset, walked out and basically paid no attention. That person is just constantly searching for some way to prove themselves. There's a lack of a kind of an inner sense of self. And I think that those ghosts, also those who have been abused or have had really, and I don't use the word trauma readily. I think it's an overused term. Everybody who I failed a test, I'm traumatized. No, you're not traumatized by failing the test. You suffered a setback. But there are people. I don't mean to say that there are people who have been traumatized in fairly dramatic ways, and those can leave a blot that sometimes is very, very hard to overcome in some way. The other ghost that can be there is one where you've learned to be toxic. You've learned that the way to succeed in life is to take advantage of others, is to, it's all about me and what I need, and the heck with everybody else. And so I have the great ideas, and let the rest of the organization or my team just figure out how to work with me, because I know, and just come with me. I'm brilliant, and you guys have to just deal with my temper tantrums and deal with whatever it is I have to spew out at you. And that can also be a dangerous ghost, if not to that person, certainly to the environment.
This resonates so deeply with me. It's very close to some of the modalities I use in some of my coaching work, and I love your ghost framing. And I want to pull out what you're saying though about people being very successful, almost motivated by these very ghosts in some ways. How do you help people see the risk and the downside before maybe they have a catastrophe or some kind of massive setback because they have this unwieldy ghost that they're unwilling to even notice or see that it's even there?
Well, most people don't see their ghosts. I always find this shocking because I was a psychology major. I've been in the world of psychology for a very long time. So the fact that so many people will say, "Oh, I never thought about this," it just shows we're all in our bubbles, and we don't see outside our bubbles. That people who just never looked there, which is fine, or that look there in their personal lives, but then not in the work life, right? So therapy is fine for your marriage, but you wouldn't think about how that translates into a work environment. So I think one of the first things is to see your ghosts. And when you see them, that gives you a lot of power. Talk about power over. If you've just got these beliefs and behaviors and attitudes that are running around in your brain, then it has power over you. It is controlling you, right? Those are deep set, right? So if it came from your childhood, you guys have looked at neuroscience. Some of those neural pathways are buried very deeply. They're not in your thinking part of your brain. They're way down in automatic. So you can't deal with them unless you see them. So bringing out what are some of those attitudes that are in my brain, you have power over them when they're out there and you can see them. They're now what Keegan and Leahy call they're object, not subject. Subject, it's part of you. Object, it's out there. And then you can begin to work on those things. So in fact, I just had class yesterday. One of the frequent things with ghosts in the class is this inability to be assertive. So what are the negative thoughts that you have in your mind that are getting in the way of you being assertive? You want to be assertive. You know you have to be assertive for your career. But in your brain, often unbeknownst to you, if I am assertive, that will mean I'm selfish, or I'm getting above my britches, or I'm not respectful of authority. I'm going outside of my role. And once you see that, you can say, oh, well, wait a second, let's test that out. Is it that I'm not respectful? You can test, and you can begin to say, okay, how do I move away from automatically acting not assertively because of these things? So first you have to surface it, then you have to look at it, then you have to maybe reframe it. So maybe we had this really good conversation yesterday. Maybe assertive just triggers you in a negative direction. I want to be assertive, but assertive means all of these things. I'm selfish. I'm going above myself. Maybe it's more about, I want to represent my team and our ideas to senior leadership. That's much more acceptable in a frame than is I want to be assertive. So one thing is just to do that. The second thing is to go and find people, women, or if it's a woman, or people that you respect who speak up and who don't seem selfish. You don't say, oh, those people are terrible. They're doing what you want to do without the baggage associated with it. So let's learn what they do. You have to become like a detective and say, well, how do they respond? What do they say? What is their demeanor? and look at them and then begin to say, okay, why don't I try that out? So one woman in one of my other classes a few years ago, she couldn't speak up in the senior team. She never, ever said anything in the senior team, but she was going, okay, I know why I'm not doing this. It's because I'm thinking this. She reasserted from being assertive to, I need to represent my team here. That's what I'm paid to do. That's what we've been working really hard on this. That's a more acceptable pathway into this realm. And I've been studying all these other things. So she went in and I'm going to, an executive vice president said something and she said, we can't do that. That's terrible. That's what she's thinking. And she normally would say nothing, but she said, okay, I'm channeling Elizabeth. Elizabeth would remain calm, not interrupt, not get flustered. She just said, I disagree with that, and here's why, very fact-based. This is what my reasoning is, and I think we can't do that. And that was the first time that she had done that. And she said, well, everybody in the room looked at me because I had never said anything before, much less disagreed with this executive vice president. So it was a big move. So she was very nervous afterwards. Did I do the right thing? What are these people thinking? But in fact, her boss said, that was really well done. And I think we should pay attention to what you said. So that's step one. And once you get step one going, then you build and build and build and build, and then you take on something else.
I love this whole area because I think our, kind of the archetypes that we form as, young response coping strategies to family dynamics does play out to a massive extent in our lives. I'm wondering if you're noticing, because you're at the coalface of education, whether you're noticing any difference in the generational kind of progress. How is that playing out? Because that's a fascinating, thought on the minds of many senior leaders: is how do I cope with Gen Z, Gen Alpha? I have no idea how to cope with this conversation.
So I want to first respond to the first thing that you said, which is we replay our family dynamics. And a couple of things there. One is, and this goes back, Scott, to what you were asking, is how do you prevent this? Is to begin to, and we have a framework in that HBR article, how do you frame your family system? Because we're always attracted to the family system we come from. Even if it's toxic, even if it's led to all kinds of bad things, we are drawn to that because that's what we know. That's familiar. In fact, I was meeting with a student yesterday who said, I said, well, you're in an organization. It's just like your home organization. Everybody is attacking everybody else and all these things are going on. She's like, oh, I never thought of that. So understanding that we are replaying over and over and over again these family system dynamics. So it's not just what are your ghosts, but what are the dynamics that you came out of, and how can you be watchful of them? Sometimes we're watchful and we end up in the same place anyway because we didn't catch certain things, but that's that. The other thing is, I don't want to think of us, there's a famous article, prisoners of childhood. We are not prisoners of childhood. So what that means is we do not have to replay those dynamics all the time. What you had to do as a child, you had limited resources, you were young, you couldn't think clearly. You do not have to respond the same way anymore as you did as a child. You're an adult, you have free, it's not easy to do it, but just having people recognize, yes, this is what you did, and don't be ashamed of it. Just because you did what you did, you had to survive. Well, but now you have survived and you're an adult with a lot of resources. So let's figure out a different way to deal with that same situation. So I just wanted to denote that. Now we can go back to the question of this new younger generation. Okay, so yes, it's always the younger generations complaining about the old folkies at the top, and the people at the top are saying, who are these people? And so I think that there are a couple of things. I don't certainly have the silver bullet to solve all of it. There are many people who work in this domain who are more knowledgeable than I am, but a few things. One is the younger people are looking for more meaning. They watch their parents, these workaholics go all day long, and they have some judgments about that. They want to have a different kind of lifestyle. So they want meaning. And so leaders have to think about creating more vision. Why are you here? How can I give you a sense of why it's important? Why do we have to work day and night? Because patients are dying. Why do we have to do this? Because we're helping. It's not just that you're doing the little things. You're doing something big in what you're doing. And we have to connect people to that larger sense of mission and vision if we're going to keep them motivated. The second thing is the work that we give them to do. Don't stick them in a room and have them working on their computers 8 hours a day. They are not going to want to be there, and they are going to leave. So give them more active roles. I mean, X teams actually enable you to do that. Go and send everybody out. You guys know more about technology that we do. Let's say we're looking to how to change our marketing group to add more AI into the marketing function. All right, you younger folks, everybody go out. We want to know what are the best sources on AI and marketing. What companies have done this before? What can you learn from what they did? What mistakes did they made? What's working the best? Who are the best vendors of AI for marketing right now? I mean, give them a set of questions and set them loose. They will be much happier and much more engaged and much more connected to what the organization's actually trying to do. If you go and do that, give them, as I said, there are these pulsing activities. So sometimes you want everybody together, and organizations do this, not just teams, but organizations do this. Smucker's Jam, you can be anywhere in the world doing whatever. Certain weeks of the year, you are at headquarters because we're networking, learning what other teams do, hearing a guest speaker who has some interesting things to say, and then you talk about how do we bring that into our daily practice. Have a very full set of activities, and bring the younger people in to those things. Get them motivated and part of the actual goings on. It shouldn't necessarily be only for senior leaders. You want engagement in some very deep ways. They are learning in a very different world than those who are older ever grew up in. And so when we think about teaching them, when we think about engaging them, we have to think about other media and other modes of teaching and learning on the job and so on and so forth. So that's why, for example, X teams. I can talk about X teams all the time. I can lecture. I can do things. But if we want to again connect, then there needs to be video content. We've created a simulation, so you actually do it and then talk about what you learned. We have all kinds of, we redid, as I said, the X Team book. The chapter 6 is a checklist so that you know how to go and you don't have to read anything. You don't have to just go directly to chapter 6 and say, okay, am I doing this? Am I doing this? How do I do this? So we need to create that learning environment, not just in our training courses, but all the learning that we need to do in a much more exciting, innovative, capture kind of way, because folks are on social media. This is what they're doing all the time. And so if we want to capture them, we need to be where they are. And oh, by the way, it's not just for them. I think everybody is more pulled in when you have more compelling, interactive, at the moment kind of learning going on.
As you look at the kind of world as it currently is, and this isn't a political statement or anything like that, but there is obviously a lot of things going on right now. If you were kind of thinking about the leadership that we need in the world, and you have a place where you can influence future leaders, what would you say is really important right now that we need to be investing in for the future that perhaps we're not seeing enough of?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think what we need to see more of, first of all, is the sense of belonging. Part of why we are where we are is because people don't feel part of anything. And so they're more easily swayed and pulled in other kinds of directions. So I think people, when they're building teams or building units, the workplace has to be a place that takes up some of the slack in the system. Not all of it. I think there are other places as well, but we need to create a place of belonging so people feel that belonging. 2, I think we need to, as I said before, create more of a sense of vision, more of a sense of mission. Why is important what we do? I think that's important. I think innovation, what we're seeing in some sense is a decline in people believing that the way we work is good. There's a lot of throwing out of what exists. And so I think we perhaps need to think clearly about, well, how do we move forward in new and innovative ways that are compelling? And I think we need to underline values. This is not, there are certain values that people, I actually think, want to believe in. And yet there's no way of saying, how do we invent to those values and to those ideals in a way that works for more people? And I think there's a huge amount of inventing that needs to take place right now in a group of people who become committed and belong with one another and can begin to reshape how we're approaching this world.
And I really love that. I think there's a huge amount of importance in the things that you're saying there. And I wonder, from your perspective, as you're listening to this, if you're in a startup or a scale up, or you're just about to leave college, or where's the hope that we have that we can create a better world? What do you think are the things that we should be optimistic about?
Well, I think that right now, people are exhausted, people are depressed, people are going off into their little cocoons, and maybe we need a little of that. People need to just kind of process what's gone on. But then I think what we need to do as leaders, and in a distributed leadership system, anyone can be a leader, is begin to focus people on, okay, what's the next chapter? We need to go from we're stuck here into a sense of future visioning. What's the next chapter? If what we have hasn't worked, then let's get organized into creating and inventing the next chapter of this crazy life that we're all living, and in this crazy world that we're living in. It's not okay to say it hasn't gone in a direction that we like, and so we're just opting out, which I think a lot of people are doing right now. And if we want them not to opt out, as I said, maybe we need some period of mourning, of getting ourselves together. But then some folks out there have to lead the charge in saying, what is the next chapter? What can the next chapter be? If we don't like what it was before, okay, what do we do? And some of that might be going forward is the resistance movement. If we don't like what's going on, part of it may be, okay, join the resistance. How do we make it so that where we're going does not remain? And the other side might be, okay, it's kind of like Mike Schuschman and Charles O'Reilly's, we have to be ambidextrous. We have to both execute on what's today and innovate to what the next chapter is. We need to be doing both of those things so that we have something to go toward. Vision is aspirational. It's inspirational. It means that you're pulling people into some new direction, not going against what is. And so unless we shift into that aspirational, inspirational, inventing new thing kind of mode, I think it's a problem.
So speaking of new chapters, you're working on a new book. Can you give us the elevator pitch, and when is it due out? When can we get our hands on it?
Well, so I'm working on the proposal for a new book, so you're not going to get your hands on it.
It'll be a minute.
Anytime soon, although I'm working on it very diligently, and I'm on sabbatical in January, so it'll be intensive book writing. So it's working more on the ghosts work. So I have 10 years worth of data of students writing about their ghosts. So I have my research assistants hard at work to say, what are the clusters that we see in these executives? What are the most common kinds of ghosts? Where do they come from? What are the ways in which you can move forward? So it starts off with kind of stuck in the bog. Where are we stuck? Where are stuck patterns? And looking at, one woman who is, it's like, okay, I was in this big bureaucracy and people didn't like me, but I managed to get things done anyway, working from on high, but it was toxic and I didn't like it. And so she moved into a startup, and the startup, she ended up in the same thing where she had no support from her peers. Everything she got was from working she was successful, but it was hard, and it was isolationist. So stuck in the bog is looking again at why those stuck patterns exist. We repeat the family dynamics, and you have to first see that. And then we offer a way to begin to, how do you see that? And what are the models? And what are these prototypical ghosts? They seem to be working. My students seem to say, yeah, I'm the go-getter, I'm the people pleaser, I'm the rebel. And then how do we get out of it? How do we do those provisional selves? How do we begin to see what our greatest fears are? How do we do that work that we were just talking about at the individual level? How do we create a future that's different? How do we create the next chapter, and what can that look like? And so that's what the book will be.
Well, I want to read that. So best wishes on
Thank
the whole
you.
process. Yeah.
Is it coming out October 31st next year?
That's right. The Halloween edition.
Well, Deborah, thank you for joining us, for sharing your insights. I've found this to be a really rich conversation, and I know our listeners will as well. So thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you so much. You guys had great questions, and you're really fun and supportive and enthusiastic, and also probing. So thank you for the interesting questions and for the interaction.
Our pleasure. Our pleasure. And until next time, folks, remember, the world is evolving. Are you?